why. I just had like a bad feeling, or you know, you can call it a premonition.
Do you have a tornado on the ground?
This is a tornado. Yeah, this is a very dangerous situation.
And I opened the back door, and it looked black.
I started calling my wife to tell her I was going to die, and I loved her.
It was just mass destruction to the point where nothing was recognizable.
It looked like the end of the world.
We have with us now Department Head of Allied Health, Sherry Whiteman. Sherry, thank you so much for coming today.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Yeah. Well, let's start with just your first initial connection with Missouri Southern. You were a student here. Can you share a little bit about your time as a student and then moving into your professional career?
Yeah, absolutely. So I came here right out of high school. I was in the honors program and was taking all my classes here at Missouri Southern. I love this institution. And so over those years, I was focused on a healthcare career. I started out focused on nursing and realized that was just not going to suit me, and moved over to respiratory therapy and found a great place, a great home for me. And yeah, so I graduated in 2007 as a registered respiratory therapist, and here I am today.
Fantastic. Now, I want to kind of step back. You're a licensed respiratory therapist, and after a few years, you were, how soon did you move into the professional area as a respiratory?
Yeah, absolutely. I moved right away.
Okay.
So I graduated December '07, and I think I was working as a respiratory therapist in Kansas by, I think, February 1 of 2008, about as quick as I could because I moved away. I moved away for a year, tried that out, and wanted to come back home, and worked. I liked to work, so I would work 3 or 5 12s a week, and when I came back home, I chose to work for Mercy Health System.
All right, so you've basically, since you graduated, you've been a professional, and then coming back to Joplin and Mercy. What year was that about when you joined Mercy?
So like 09, right at the start of 09.
Okay.
And I did some PRN jobs in Springfield and stuff like that to get some expanded experience, but Mercy was where I wanted to be. So yeah, I mean, I worked as soon as I could the whole time right after school. That was the goal, right?
Okay, yeah.
And yeah, I like to do ER, ICU, critical care, and that's what I liked to do when I was at Mercy as a respiratory therapist.
Okay, awesome.
Yeah.
Can you tell me a little bit more now with Missouri Southern, your position now? What do you do here?
Yeah, so I actually ended up coming to teach here with Missouri Southern in 2011 in August, and I've been here ever since. So I started out as a clinical instructor for the respiratory therapy program, the one that I graduated from. I moved up as program director, and now I'm the department chair of Allied Health. And so along with respiratory, I help to oversee EMS, radiology, and dental hygiene as well.
Okay.
Yeah.
So a lot of hats that you currently wear around. That's fantastic.
Yeah.
And I love the fact that you started here as a student, and now you're getting to spend time investing in students and encouraging them in that current career too.
Yeah, I love that too, frankly.
That's so cool. So let's move back into the context of the tornado and your experience in that. So before the tornado, what was kind of your day-to-day? What did that look like?
Yeah, so I think by then I was days. I think I was day shift by then. I might have still been nights. You know, when you're working nights and days, sometimes it runs together. But I would work 3 12s a week. Like I said, I like to work ER, ICU, critical care, that kind of stuff. So I would work 3 days a week. I would go into work and take care of all my patients and then head home, sleep, right, and get up and do it the next day. I had a PRN at that time, which means as needed. So I typically was also picking up a couple of shifts at another facility, Carthage, at that time. And so I would probably work about 5 days a week back then, just doing what I loved, respiratory therapy. And then at that time, my husband and I were just, you know, we hadn't had our house very long, and we were still kind of getting to know each other. So we didn't really do a whole lot. We hung out with our friends. We didn't have kids, so it was work and life, right?
Right. Okay, so looking at just the day of the tornado, You lived in Neosho,
Yeah.
and you actually had just gotten back from vacation, right?
Yeah, it was just me and my husband, and I was typically work and just life. We didn't really do much traveling, but we had put our foot down and we're like, we're going away. We're going to take a break. And so about a month and a half before, we booked a resort in Branson, and we were dead set on getting away. I'm a bit of a sucker, and when people want me to switch shifts or whatever, I usually try to say yes. And that was graduation weekend, and I had been asked by, I think, everybody in the department, hey, can you trade me? Hey, can you switch? And I was like, nope, we're going out of town. I got to stick to my guns. We're doing this. And so that Sunday we had just returned. Otherwise, I might have been there, but I mean, I count myself blessed that I was not. And so, yeah, we had just gotten home. We were outside in the front yard working on the lawn when everything kind of started. So, and unpacking from the trip.
Oh, yes. So what was that point? So you're working in the lawn, just kind of recovering from your trip. What was the point where you realized, hey, this is going to be a bigger deal?
Yeah, so we had actually come back from the trip a little bit early on that day. Like, we could have stayed in Branson longer, but we didn't, knowing heavy storms were coming in, and we didn't want to drive in the bad weather. And my husband wanted to make sure to get the lawn mowed before the rain. So he was outside mowing the yard, and you could see, you know, kind of the line of the edge of the storm starting to come, and the colors were changing just a little bit, and the wind was picking up. And so he was out there trying to race the storm and get the lawn done. I was picking up inside and just kind of watching the TV, and you know, it just kind of, I don't know, the atmosphere just changed a little bit. And he said, okay, I got enough done. I'm coming inside. And that's about the time all the warnings started coming through, and, you know, severe thunderstorm warning, this is happening in Joplin, everybody take cover, those kinds of things were flashing on the TV. And that's kind of when we were like, okay, all right, this is going to be a big storm. We didn't expect, obviously, what happened.
Right. So you see the storm coming in, and you're probably more preparing just what are you going to do as a result of the storm.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right. But then what point did you decide, okay, now we need to change what's going to happen next, what we're going to do? Yeah.
So we started getting texts it was kind of all at once, right? Where you started getting a couple of text messages that said something like, the hospital's been hit. My husband was in law enforcement at the time. His radio was starting to go off. We were seeing on the TV some typical imagery that's usually shown, that's pretty standard for what happened with the tornado. There's a camera image of the tornado coming toward the hospital. So that was on the television. The news is starting to report it. It's coming. This is happening. And that's when we thought, oh, okay, all right, this is real. Something is hitting Joplin. We don't know how bad it is. Then we get, like I said, those texts that say things like, the hospital's been hit. And we thought, all right, we have to change what we're going to do. At that point, then we started talking amongst ourselves. I said, I have to go in. If the hospital is hit, I have to go in. There's no way I'm not. And also then with his job, if they make a call like that, he has to go in. So we also needed to wait for the storm to clear Neosho, because about that time, it's starting to hit Neosho with hail and storms as well. So while all that's going on, we're prepping our own go bags, waiting for it to clear Joplin, clear Neosho, so we can safely do what we needed to do.
So you both decide, okay, as soon as it's clear, then we're going to head toward Joplin.
Yep.
And so how did you get to Joplin? What that process looked like after the storm? Getting there.
Yeah, absolutely. So like I said, we packed our bags. My husband got into uniform, and he got his stuff gathered. I was planning to drive myself, but two of my teacher friends, Stephanie and Daniel, had seen that it had hit, and they were messaging me immediately like, hey, what do you need? We're talking about going to Joplin. And I said, I'm going. I couldn't go with Philip because he needed to report to his station and then go up. And so they said, we'll come get you. We'll drop you. And that way you don't have to worry about your car. We're going to be up there. So they came immediately, picked me up, and drove me up to Joplin.
So how long did it take you to get, you're headed toward Mercy.
Yeah.
And how long did it take you to get there? How long does it normally take you to get there?
Oh, it usually takes me, about that time it would take me about 25 minutes, and I think it took me 30 minutes, maybe. We were so fresh right after the storm had hit that there wasn't a lot of people out yet. There wasn't a lot of blockades or anything like that. Okay. So it really wasn't too hard to get down there, but we never made it all the way to the hospital. So we got up Main, we turned on to 32nd toward the hospitals, and we only got maybe 2 or 3 blocks down the road before we really weren't going to be able to make it much farther. We turned down one of the streets, there were power lines down, branches blocking the road, and they weren't going to be able to get me any farther than that because they were in a pretty big vehicle. And so I just said, all right, look, I'm going to hop out. I'm just going to hike in. We'll figure it out. I'll try to call you. Of course, I wasn't thinking that the lines were down. So I was like, I'll call you. It's fine. And so they dropped me. They went and found some places where they could go pick up and help clean. And I started to hike my way toward the hospital.
So what did you see on your way there? Did you meet some people, or what would that look like?
Yeah, so the road that I was on, I think people had already kind of moved out of their houses or were still trying to figure out, but the road that I was first on didn't have as much devastation. So I saw lots of downed trees, lots of downed power lines, but it was navigable, right? I could get down there. So I got about to the end of the road and I came across some people who were loading people into the back of a truck to take them to medical facilities. So I helped with that for a little while, trying to make sure patients were going to get somewhere that they needed to go. And when that was about clear, I said, okay, I'm going to keep moving, got to get to the hospital. So I kept working my way in. Of course, along the way, I would see somebody else walking or whatever, and everybody was just saying, are you okay? Yeah, I'm fine. Are you okay? Yeah, I'm fine. We'd keep going. At one point, I got down, there was a nursing home that had a lot of devastation. I think it was on 26th. And I got to that point, and they had been clearing bodies from that space, and so I kind of peeked around that, helped with that. They were covering them with blankets, so I helped a little bit with that. And I was like, okay, I need to keep going. This is done. Keep going. About that time, then I started getting a message or two, very seldom. That was just like, we're at Memorial Hall. And then somebody had told me, I ran across somebody and they said the hospital at that point had pretty much been evacuated. It wasn't fast. That hiking process and all of that was not fast. So by the time I'm getting in that vicinity, they'd pretty much already evacuated the hospital. Somebody shared that with me. It was a colleague. She was kind of doing the same thing, hiking in. And so I said, okay, well, if they've got it evacuated, there's not much I can go and do there. And I can't really get to Memorial Hall from here. I mean, I can, but it's going to take forever. So then I decided to hike back and go over to Freeman and see if there was anything I could do there.
Okay. So you get to Freeman, and what did that space look like?
Yeah, so I was really kind of shocked. The whole entranceway was full of people looking for their loved ones, bringing in loved ones, people who were injured, people who had wraps on their heads or were bleeding actively. I ran across several of my coworkers. I don't think they had all been working. I think they were just there, again, trying to do the same thing, help. And I even ran across one of my coworkers who was looking for his family. He was trying to find them in there, just trying to do what he could. I was hopeful that I could maybe step in and help offer medical assistance, but by that time, I think they kind of had everything that they could manage as far as there wasn't going to be any more machines they could add. They didn't have them, or something like that. And I wasn't employed there, so that, they didn't really need me to help with that at that point, if that makes sense. So I checked in with my colleagues. I made sure everybody was okay, did whatever I could, obviously. And then at that point I was like, okay, so what's next? And I think it was like midnight by that point or something. It was close to midnight. So I stepped out of the front of Freeman, and there's a really prevalent picture when you look back at tornado images, and it's the image of all the ambulances lined up down 32nd Street in the dark, and it's all the lights. That's all that the picture is seeing all the lights. I got to see that from that front of Freeman. Now I could see it because all the trees were down. In any other circumstance, you can't see like that, but I could see all the ambulances coming down 32nd Street with their lights on. And honestly, I mean, even now it's giving me chills, right? But it gave me chills, and I just thought for a minute, like, okay, there's hope. They're here to help us. We're not alone. Everybody's gonna be okay.
So these are ambulances both bringing patients and also helping transport them
Yes,
to other facilities, right?
It was mostly at that point, it was mostly the transport ones,
Okay.
because the hospitals and everybody was handling what they could while they could. And it was that we were needing to ship these patients out to somewhere better that could help us handle all of the medical needs. Yeah.
I love how you relate that idea of the ambulances to hope
Yeah.
in that,
Yeah.
in the midst of that chaos, but like the hope that these people are going to get taken care of, and,
Yeah.
and people are here to help.
Yeah, absolutely.
In the middle of that, and that's
Yeah.
what a cool image.
Yeah.
And I imagine there are probably many memories that are burned into your
Mm-hmm.
memory, but maybe many images are burned into your memory from that, but maybe that could be the one that
Oh,
sticks
yeah.
out. But are there any other memories or experiences during, those hours that you were just moving through, like shortly after the tornado, that stick with you, that you feel like comfortable sharing?
Yeah. I think that's the one that sticks with me the most, is the ambulances. And then I think the other memory was just talking with my friend who had also hiked in, and she's talking about how she stopped and put a tourniquet on somebody's leg and then kept hiking toward the hospital. And typically when you're putting a tourniquet on someone's leg, you don't just put a tourniquet on and walk off, but that's what we could do. And just the fact that that was like, yeah, that's what I did, and I'm moving on. That's a really interesting memory, because in that moment it was normal, and that's not normal.
Sure.
Right?
Yeah.
And so I think just recognizing that sometimes even the most minute action, or it doesn't always have to be the highest fidelity, the highest level of technology out there, that's still going to positively impact a patient. And you can still have a good outcome or still serve somebody, right? I don't always have to have the fanciest tech to still do what I need to do.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So kind of on that idea with how things have to change based off of what you have available.
Yeah.
What are some things that you have either learned from that, or have you seen hospitals implement as a result of things learned from that experience?
Yeah. I wanted to make sure that my peers were supported, and I wanted to listen, and I listened to everything that they shared with me from that night. And it was everything from when you put a patient in the hall, make sure their shoes are with them. I can't say that that was standard practice, at least not for me at the time. And even oftentimes when we would have tornado alerts, I didn't always take them as seriously as maybe I ought to have. But putting someone in the hall with their shoes wasn't something that I made sure I did every single time. But in this instance, those patients needed their shoes because there was so much glass around and rain, and it was slick. How do you evacuate somebody who's barefoot? I can tell you a lot of my peers will carry flashlights on their badge now, no matter what. Some of us did it before, but now almost all of them do, because how do you see without light? Right? They keep Sharpies on their badges now for writing or marking things. One of the ones that I think really stuck with me was the idea that you can bag somebody or breathe for somebody, and you don't have to have oxygen, right? So the act of breathing in and of itself is about moving gas in and out of your body. And like right now, I don't have any extra oxygen, right?
Yeah.
I'm moving normal atmospheric air in and out, and I am fine, right? Now, when people are sick, we give them extra oxygen, okay? But you don't have to have it for the act of breathing to occur. Does that make sense so far?
So, yeah.
So when the tornado hit the building, it twisted some of the building. Doors were blocking oxygen tanks. And a standard practice in my field is that you bag somebody or breathe for them with 100% oxygen.
Okay.
But it's not really necessarily always that they need the oxygen. We need the act of breathing. So learning from my peer that like they still used an ambu bag and they still squeezed and gave breaths and the patient still breathed, which meant they were still living and I didn't have to have oxygen. That thought had never really crossed my mind in that way before, if that makes sense. Yes, they probably still needed oxygen. And yes, their oxygen saturation, which is important to us, was low in their body, but they were still breathing and they were still alive.
Very cool.
You know, stuff like that.
Great.
Yeah.
And I imagine there are just so many other things that have kind of not been rewritten, but at least rediscovered or reconsidered, like in the midst of emergency cases, you can do this to at least maintain some stability for patients.
Yep, absolutely.
Very cool.
Yeah.
Now, looking back, now 15 years later, what things have stuck with you, or what things kind of do you reflect upon now, even 15 years later? How have you grown as a result of that?
I kind of reflect on the time after the tornado. I got to work in the tent hospital, Mercy MASH is what we called it. And we would spend nights counting oxygen tanks to make sure we had enough oxygen for people, and then walking loops around the tent with the hospital as our background with the flag on it, you know, and the lights shining on it. And when I think about the tornado, that's where I go back to, I think, the most. Because again, in that tent, we learned that you can still do a lot of medical care that's not fancy, but it still serves patients well. And then just that feeling of what it felt like to work every night, and that hospital is there, but you're still serving patients over here, and we can still do what we do. It didn't take us down. And just, I think just resilience, I guess, would be the one word, if you put it in one word, right? Resilience.
Can you tell me a little bit more about what that hospital looked like you're functioning but within a tent, which I imagine you don't have a lot of training necessarily for a functioning tent hospital, but what did that look like? How did you adapt some of the things? You mentioned counting like oxygen tanks.
Yeah.
So counting how much you have as a resource and being much more conscious of that. How did you change some of your practices even in that context?
Yeah. It was really interesting working in a tent hospital. I mean, it was an experience, to say the least. And so, you know, you're going into this tent. It's literally a canvas tent. You had to put on little booties to make sure your shoes weren't dragging in a whole bunch of debris and making the ground any dirtier than necessary. And like, it was just interesting to like zip in and out of like work. But when we talk about the things that we did, one of the big memories I have was running I'm pretty sure it was running as a vent, but it might have been running as a BiPAP. Regardless, that doesn't matter, right? It was a breathing apparatus that typically I would plug into a wall in a working hospital. I would plug it into a wall and it would just work off the wall. But in the tent hospital, I had these giant H tanks, they're very tall. I mean, almost as tall as I am, full of oxygen. And so I was pushing the machine forward. I had the giant tank and was pulling it behind me and walking sideways next to this hospital bed with a patient who's using the machine. And it was surreal because you never think like, oh yeah, that's what I'm gonna do with my skills. Again, we still serve patients, and that's what matters at the end. But what it made me realize is I have to be more thoughtful sometimes about processes. I have to be more mindful of my time. So I had to go count oxygen tanks outside to make sure I had enough, because if we were running low, we had to order them, because it's not like they just show up.
Oh, right.
We would use those H tanks in the ICU, and they would be running to patients. So we had to monitor that, and if it was running low, we had to call someone early before it ran out to come and change it, because if it ran out, patients are in trouble.
Right.
And so just, I think, to be more thoughtful about the timing of processes and what it takes, right, to keep everything going smoothly.
With the healthcare just mindset of individuals, do you think that has changed, or how did that even maybe become more apparent in the midst of emergency situations?
I think it just kind of, I don't know, it just kind of happened. This transformation just happened, and everybody was doing it. And so I think now it's something everybody looks for, because everybody who was practicing transformed into this, and kind of, we had to do this, this is who we are. And because of the way medical education works, right, you're trained up by preceptors, and they're going to train those traits into the next generation.
All right.
You know?
Now, there's this idea of the butterfly people.
Yeah.
Can you tell me a little bit about your experience with that?
So I never personally had any experience with a butterfly person myself. But what I can say is I've talked to several people who said that they had an experience with butterfly people, and I've heard lots of stories about them. What I understand is that during the storm, if there was something harrowing happening or somebody needed assistance, these people who had like butterfly wings would kind of show up, help in whatever way was needed, and then just like disappear. And so I've heard stories of them helping somebody get out of places or helping to shield them and stuff like that. And then they just disappeared.
Interesting.
Yeah.
I'm sure there's some incredible stories that come with that. And I've heard multiple people talk about some of those experiences.
Yeah.
But it's interesting in the healthcare perspective of just hearing somebody from that perspective on how they saw that happen.
Yeah.
As an educator, how do you see your experience play into helping future generations of healthcare professionals utilize the insights that you've had, and how do you share that with them?
Yeah. I take some of that basic knowledge a little more seriously and try to hammer it into them a little bit more than I probably would have otherwise. So example, again, oxygen tanks, and I know I keep talking about that, but it's a great example. There are math calculations, and everybody hates math, right? But there are calculations you can do to determine how long that tank is gonna last for you.
Okay.
So I hammer that home when I taught in the respiratory therapy curriculum. I hammered that concept home hard. And then I told them why. Because when we worked in this particular situation, and I never thought I'd have to do that calculation again in my life, but by golly, I had to pull that sucker out, and I used it. And I want to make sure that they know and understand that too. Sometimes it's easy to say, oh, we don't need to know that foundational stuff. We don't need that. Yes, you do. It shows back up in crazy ways, and you can't just discard it, right? And so anytime I could, I shared my experiences with the students and tried to use it as an explanation of like, why am I making you do this terrible thing? Because if you don't have this foundation and something happens, you can't fall back on that foundation. So I got to make sure it's really strong, you know, and then in expecting what I expected from them is preparation, you know. You need to be here, you need to have these items with you, this is how we do this, and this is why.
Great. Well, I think the students are so privileged to have individuals who have such a broad experience, and being able to bring like areas from pretty catastrophic like instances and bring like, this is why we do these things.
Yeah.
And I think that helps them understand better why we have these certain practices, and it makes so much more sense than just because the book says I need to.
Yeah, exactly.
I think that's fantastic that you are able to bring that perspective to our students.
Yeah.
Sherry, do you have anything else that you feel like would be helpful for our audience to kind of grasp better about how the healthcare system approached the catastrophe of the Joplin tornado?
I think I would just say that I'm not sure that it could have been handled much better. I think everybody came together, worked together, and did what needed to be done. And we should really be thankful for that. I think that's one of the things that makes Joplin special, is we're collaborative, especially when we need to be. And that serves everybody really well.
Fantastic. Sherry, thank you so much for sharing your stories with us today. And we look forward just to see how our students here at Missouri Southern get to grow from not only yours, but so many other perspectives of the faculty here that encourage them in their growth, both as individuals, but also future healthcare professionals.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. With us today is Jason Smith, and he is the EMS chief at METS. Jason, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you for having me.
Could you tell me just a little bit what brought you into the interest of being part of EMS, and what was your connection to Missouri Southern?
Yeah, so I think growing up as a kid, I was always fascinated with fire trucks and kind of had that goal of being a fireman one day. And so my senior year of high school, I attended Webb City, and one of the Webb City firemen was actually teaching an EMT class, doing night classes there at the school. And so I was able to attend my normal high school classes during the day and then attend EMT class at night. They also had a fire class that was going on Sundays, so I attended that through my senior year as well. So after graduation, I was able to actually come out with my EMT and license and fire certifications. And so it was really probably in the beginning drawn a little more towards the fire field. And that's what got me into EMS. And then in '96, got hired at METS Ambulance. Formerly it was called GEMS back in the day. So for Joplin Emergency Medical Services. Started there in '96, and then Missouri Southern had a paramedic program at that time. And so I got enrolled into that and took the class, graduated from my paramedic in '97.
And during your time here at Missouri Southern, can you tell me a little bit about how your experience here prepared you for what you're doing now?
Yeah, I think, you know, with EMS, you have 2 levels of certification, EMT basic, where they can provide more basic care, and then paramedic, which is advanced care. And I knew that once I started working for GEMS at the time, that I really, I wasn't going to be happy or satisfied doing the basic stuff. So I really wanted to further my career and advance. And so Missouri Southern being here in the hometown, then that was the obvious choice. And so came out, took my paramedic class here, and really got a lot of good information, and feel like it really prepared me for what I wanted to do.
Now, stepping back to the day of the tornado, you had just recently moved into a new position, but you were also partially the fire chief for Oronogo at the same time, right?
Yeah, that's right.
So can you tell me a little bit what happened that day? How did things kind of
Yeah,
evolve?
so I had become the director at METS, or EMS chief, in February of that year. And so I was really just trying to learn that position. I had been a supervisor prior to that, and just wasn't really familiar much with the backside of the business side of METS at the time. And so was really just trying to get my feet wet and learn that. And so didn't have a lot of the connections with area EMS services and a really good understanding of how everything kind of worked. I'd served as the fire chief at Oronogo since 2005. And so the tornado happened on a Sunday. So my schedule at METS is Monday through Friday. And so it was a Sunday, I was at home, and being the fire chief, we had been dispatched to a house fire over in Carl Junction. And so I was actually on a fire truck responding to that fire when we started hearing the radio reports that a tornado was down on the southwest end of the city of Joplin. And so trying to process in my mind, you know, what I needed to do, and knew that I really did not need to be on the scene of a fire with, you know, with the tornado on the south end of town. So once we arrived on the scene, we actually had one of our ambulances there standing by, and I had them give me a ride back to the station there at the fire department so that I could pick my vehicle up. And then I came into Joplin from there.
In an instance like that, how do you kind of mentally prepare? How do I switch gears from I'm going to a fire call to instead I'm going to a tornado, which I'm not sure even exactly what I'm going into at this point?
Yeah, in most cases, you know, you're prepared to go to the fire. We were not going to be the first in on the fire. We were going there to back Carl Junction up. So we've got a little bit more of a limited role. And so really wasn't putting whole thought into the fire, so to speak, because I was caught on listening to the radio traffic of the tornado. And so, and you know, we've had tornadoes. We're not new to having tornadoes in the area. And we had worked multiple tornadoes from, you know, down in Newton County, they had a pretty bad tornado at 43 in Iris that came through there. We've had a tornado in Carl Junction before, I believe in 2007. And so we weren't new to that, but we had no idea as far as what the level of this storm was going to be. And so really in my mind was just more going through of getting my vehicle, contacting the supervisor that was on duty for us that day, kind of seeing where he needed me at, where he was going to be at, and then just kind of working through, you know, my plan was going to be meet up with him, come up with a game plan. We've done these before, and kind of go from there.
So you have an idea of kind of how you're going to approach it. Did things shift once you got to the location of where the tornado was, and how you thought we need to approach
really
this?
Where it shifted for me on my way into the station, I got a hold of, or on my way into Joplin, I got a hold of the supervisor on the phone. And keep in mind, this is, of the other tornadoes I mentioned, he was on duty for all of those as well, so he has experience. And when he finally answered the phone, I asked him where he was, and he said at the station. And I said, well, why are you at the station and not out on the scene? And he says, I don't think you understand how big this is. And he said, just come here. And so I got to the station, walked in, and coming from the north end of town, I didn't see any damage or anything else because everything was, you know, pretty much 15th Street and south. So walking into the station and seeing him there with 2 or 3 radios set up in front of him, a couple of phones setting out, and just watching him try to talk to 100 different people on the radio, it let me know then that, okay, this is bigger than what I thought that it was going to be, but I still did not probably at that point have a grasp of how big it was. I just knew that it was a little bit more out of the abnormal than what we were used to.
Can you walk me through like the first several hours after the tornado had hit? What were your moves, or what did you do through that point?
So typically when we have a big event, we try to set up what's called a unified command post, and that's with fire, police, EMS, and that way we try to get all the decision makers in one area so that we can kind of all plan together what our course of action is going to be. So I remember getting a hold of the city of Joplin to find out where their command post was set up. And they said that they had multiple areas of people across the city, but they thought that the main command post was set up around 20th and Main. So I left Daryl at the station, told him that I was going to go down to 20th and Main, made contact with them down there and kind of find out, what was going on, because we're probably at this point about 30 to 45 minutes into the event, and just try to get a game plan. And so got my vehicle. Back then, we did not have a good way of contacting mutual aid around us. You always relied on your dispatch center to call other agencies around you for help, but that was not going to be an option in this case because they were too overwhelmed with the calls. So we actually, before I left, we sat one of our EMTs down in the station with a Rolodex of all the area EMS agencies, and just had him start calling. So not a good plan, but that was the only plan that we had at the time. So got down to, ended up being a little bit closer to 24th and Main. But as I got to 20th and Main, I could tell things were starting to look different. And as I got down to 24th and Main, just to get to see how everything was just leveled, and not really another good explanation, just everything looked flat. I remember looking over, and I shouldn't have probably been able to see St. John's from that point, but looking over and seeing St. John's with smoke coming out of it, that was a big eye-opener. Being able to look back towards the east and really just feel like you could see forever because there was nothing in the way other than various columns of smoke and, just nothing but flat debris as far as you could see. And the amount of people out wandering around that, and I hate to use the term, zombies, but just walking aimlessly. I mean, with injuries, just stunned from what had happened. And so really just trying to once I saw that, that really was my first clue that this is way bigger than anything we've ever dealt with, and we knew we were going to need a lot of help, but just trying to process through that. Visiting with the fire department, they, a couple challenges for them. They had 2 fire stations that were hit. Their resources were limited in the beginning, and so just trying to process that. To be honest, it was overwhelming.
I'm interested to know, you mentioned as you were looking just to figure out where the main command post was, or the command center, command, what's the term that you used? I'm sorry.
Unified command.
Unified command.
Yeah,
Okay.
unified command.
So you mentioned looking for the main unified command center in Joplin. What was the impact of the tornado to your means of communication? What kind of phone line capabilities did you have? What kind of communication do you have with other departments?
Yeah, so we were really fortunate that the radio system in Joplin stayed intact. So we run off what's called an 800 system through the city, and it was pretty much unaffected. And so even for the amount of radio traffic between fire, police, and EMS, the system was fantastic. Where there's some flaws, and a couple of times or a few times that you may have multiple people trying to key up and talk and it would beep at you. You did have that occasionally, but for the most part, our radio system fortunately was good. The issue is any outside services that come in are not on the same radio system. And back then, we did not have a statewide mutual aid plan. We didn't have common radio frequencies. So that was more so the challenge. But as far as talking amongst our ambulance crews and the Newton County ambulance, who we work closely with day in, day out, they're on the same radio system. So us in Newton County really didn't have any issues talking. Cell phones, you could send a text. Occasionally you could maybe get a call to go through. And then landlines up at our main station were not affected. So fortunately, we were able to make out, some calls for help, off the landline.
So being able to communicate is a fundamental part to being able to take care of the needs.
Any disaster, they talk and they preach. The first thing to go wrong in a disaster is your communications. And so, and for us, fortunately, radio communications with each other was not an issue. The unified command post, to just clarify, that is not a building. That's not that is typically the back of somebody's vehicle, the back of the fire department battalion chief vehicle, or the back of our vehicle of the supervisor. It's typically at a vehicle. It's on the scene. And so when we got down there, there really wasn't a unified command post per se. It was, again, just so overwhelming. And when you'd go down, it was hard to be down there on the scene because there was so much to do. There were so many patients, there were just so much going on that you effectively could not manage a scene. Right. Therefore, with our supervisor being in the office, that was the absolute best decision he made, was to post up there, because he wasn't distracted by all of that and he could focus on, listening to the guys on the radio and get help where they were needing it at.
So that leads me to another question of how do you determine what are your priorities in a situation like that? So you have somebody who's kind of outside of the chaos of the immediate moment, helping try to navigate some of that. But what does that process look like and how you prioritize it?
Well, really, so the priorities for us on the EMS side, obviously, is to treat and transport patients. And the big challenge that we faced right off the bat was St. John's being hit. So the 2 hospitals in Joplin, that's going to leave Freeman to take all these patients. And so we realized too early on, the first several ambulances right after dispatch, as they pulled up into areas that were affected, their ambulances were just overwhelmed with people. And so the first few ambulances probably had anywhere from 10 to 12 people just jump in the back and kind of overtake that ambulance. So they would transport those patients to the hospital and just to try to unload them and get back. But, it was those first couple of ambulances that tried to go to St. John's that realized St. John's is not an option. And so the first thing that we have to think about is how can we do the most good for the most amount of people with what limited resources that we have. And so early on we realized we can't transport everybody, and so we set up across that affected area about 7 different treatment areas, if you will, where we positioned ambulances in those areas. So as people needed help and they were calling 911, they could be directed to one of those closer treatment areas, because we did not at that point have enough resources to be able to go to, you know, every individual call. So to just kind of hit on the command part a little bit, the city has got what we would set up during a big event. It's called the EOC, or Emergency Operations Center. And with it being a Sunday, it took a little bit to get that set up, because all of your command staff from the city and everybody else, they're off on Sundays. So for that to get set up, it took it just a little bit to get up and going. So we transitioned after about an hour from being down at 24th and Main. They came on the radio, said the EOC was now up and functional. So we left that area, the command staff guys that were there, we left that area, went up to the city, and they have it in the basement of their Fire Station 1. And so we relocated up there. And so in that room, you have, you know, command staff from the fire department, police department, public utilities, and dispatch, and so forth. So as calls came in for 911 calls for help, if it was something medical related or needing an ambulance, then we would write that information down on a list. I would give that information to Daryl, who was our supervisor set up in the office. And then he would take that information and send that out to the other crews. So early on, in probably the first few hours, that was the system that we used.
Oh. Being able to pivot so quickly for recognizing that moving people wasn't maybe as big a priority as just treating at certain locations.
Yeah, the
Really
problem, especially those first few ambulances that loaded up, those victims all walked to the ambulance and had pretty minor injuries. It was just more of a state of shock. So you leave the scene and you're taking them to the hospital. You just left back behind, you know, numerous injuries that couldn't walk or that were life-threatening that, you know, potentially could have been treated. So, yeah, realizing early on with that transporting was not going to be the option. We needed to stay put somewhere, let people come to us. And once we did that, just hearing stories from the crews that were in those areas, they treated multiple life-threatening injuries there on the scene. And then the city and the public, you know, that's really the true heroes of it, is the community, because they were willing to do those transports then to the hospital for us. So we used cars, the back of pickups, anything that we could use to get those patients from those treatment areas then to the hospital.
When you are trying to position or even navigate a devastated area like that, how challenging is it for the ambulances to get through, or how challenging was it for many of the ambulances to navigate spaces they didn't know if roads were even available or
Yeah,
accessible?
no, I mean, it was a big challenge, and some of the crews even talked about, you know, going down roads where they actually drove up into the yard and over the foundation of the house because the house was sitting out in the middle of the road, so, or what was left of the house. So, yeah, they were going through yards. You know, fortunately, Walmart and some area tire places offered, you know, in the next couple of days to do free fixes for us on, you know, flat tires, because you end up with all kinds of stuff in tires. So they were willing to do that for us. But yeah, even being from this area and talking to several people that had been there working for Mets longer than I had, that lived in the city and that'd been their home, you didn't know where you were at. Because all the landmarks, all the street signs, everything, you know, is gone. You have a general idea of where you are, but to know a specific street, especially if it's not Main Street or, you know, a common thoroughfare, it was real challenging to know even where you were at.
For your specific tasks during that time, most of it was communicating to others, or what specifically things did you do during those first several hours?
I think it was, yeah, taking those 911 calls and getting those to our incident commander, which was Daryl at the time, to get those calls out. The other big challenge that we had was we were starting to understand the scope of it, how big it was. Still didn't probably fully realize that it was a mile wide and through the whole south part of the city, but trying to figure out how to get more help and more resources, and of other ambulances that were in town. You know, there were several ambulances that, especially take Kansas and Oklahoma, that were behind this storm that just came over to help, but we didn't know they were there. We didn't have communication with them. And so knowing what resources you have and then trying to get more help on the way was a big challenge. We did not have, and I don't know if this is in it later or not, but statewide mutual aid for EMS was really developed because of Joplin. And so we've got to play an important role helping to develop that. And so I knew that Newton County Ambulance, they had several of their resources along with their director on Range Line around Home Depot area. So we knew that that area was somewhat being taken care of. I knew we had our units on Main Street and kind of, several blocks east and west of that. So I knew that we had units kind of spread out. But the other big challenge was in those first few hours is, yes, we're taking a lot of people to Freeman. Freeman can't, as good as what Freeman is, or St. John's, was at the time, they can't take that huge influx. So now these patients have to go somewhere. So getting ambulances coordinated to Freeman, not only out on the scene, but now getting outside ambulances coordinated to go to Freeman so that they could help transport patients out of Freeman to other hospitals around the region.
So going with that, I'm sure you had many volunteers and other just agencies that are flooding the space to want to help.
Yeah.
What did you see come together more smoothly than you anticipated, or how did you see so many different agencies functioning together in a pretty short amount of time?
I think that the challenge on the resource side is knowing what you have. There were other ambulance services that were there, and at absolutely no fault of theirs, they're kind of doing their own thing because they're trying to help, and which was great. It just makes it challenging for us when we've got 911 calls that are coming in and we're trying to send ambulances to these certain areas. A lot of those places had already been checked by other services or other agencies, whatever it may be, that we didn't know about. So I think that in any type of a big event like that, that's going to present a challenge. As far as everybody coming together, it's hats off to the community, because really it was the citizens that after, the first hour for those next several hours that did the majority of the transports for us. So it's really that side of it, and just seeing how the community came together, that was the biggest, when we look at true heroes of it. I think it's hats off to the community. We as fire and EMS and PD, this is our job, so to speak. Yeah, that's going a little bit above and beyond probably that day, but it's really the community that they're not expected to have to do anything like that, but they did. And so I think that was big to see. The people that want to come in and volunteer, the city did a good job fairly early on as using, and I think it was Missouri Southern that they utilized as a volunteer basically staging area. So if people called in wanting to help, sending them to a location to where somebody can oversee that and find out what their qualifications are, what they're planning to do, or whatever, having that coordination there was great. But just to have people that showing up into town with chainsaws and all of this, it's great, but when there's no way of coordinating that and you don't know where you have the help out, it adds another challenge to it.
Sure. Personally, kind of looking at, as you kind of reflect back on your response and some of the experiences, what were some of the biggest challenges that you felt like professionally but personally in your response during that time?
Well, being probably newer into that position, I did not have a good relationship just because I did not know a lot of the area directors around the state. And so I didn't know really capabilities of other ambulance services around the region. As a paramedic on the street and as a supervisor, I'm responsible for knowing my company inside and out, and I did. I felt pretty good with that. However, not having those contacts and not knowing a good way of getting more help there and understanding that process, I feel like was a big challenge in the beginning. And so that was a big learning experience for me. And being set up in the EOC like that, we had done a drill a week or two ahead of that it was a drill simulating a earthquake with a New Madrid fault line. And so fortunately, inside the EOC, everybody knew where their spot was, and everybody kind of knew what resources that you had available inside that EOC, because we just had done a tabletop walkthrough, a couple of weeks prior. Right. So locally, felt pretty good, but as far as getting the help and having those outside contacts, I can't stress the importance of that, because now again, statewide, we've grown to a statewide EMS mutual aid system. We practice it every month. I've seen it used in other events around the state, and it's been, it's worked very well. And so now knowing how we operate as far as getting help and coordinating and having radio communications is worlds ahead of, where we were back during the Joplin tornado.
Can you tell me, I know you, let me step back for a second. I know you have opportunities to speak to some of our students even now, periodically, and what are some things that you've pulled from that event that you are able to share with our students, like some insights or how to be better prepared for situations like this?
Well, I think that the one thing it taught me is you're going to make mistakes. You're going to make mistakes, and you have to just know that when you do, you make the best decision with the information that you have at hand. And if it's the wrong one, so be it. You learn from it. You get better from it. And so not being afraid to admit your failures or your weaknesses, because I think by learning that, it really humbled me, and it really made me appreciate things that I've learned since. So I think just knowing that you're going to make mistakes, don't be afraid to make those mistakes, and be willing to learn from it so that you get better from it. So I think that's the big thing, and just knowing that you don't have to not trying to make the decisions by yourself. Reaching out and getting that other help. The thing is, even in speaking with other directors across the state from Springfield and some of those areas, those guys in Springfield, I've got a great respect for. They helped us out tremendously during that event, but they'd been in their positions, for a long time, but nobody had experienced anything on that magnitude. So they all got a chance to learn from it as well. So I just hope that any mistakes and failures that we had on that night, that people can learn from it. But overall, all in all, I think for the size of what the event was, here's the deal. Of over 1,500 injuries, there were still only 161 fatalities, which is still more than what we wanted. We didn't want a single one, but that was not in our control. And so to see the amount of injuries, and with one hospital being totally, decimated, the heroes at that hospital, how they stepped up, the heroes at Freeman, how they stepped up, you couldn't ask for a better response from all of them in the community. So I think just learning from the past and making sure that you take steps to be better, so that now, can you ever be fully prepared for that? I don't think anybody can be prepared for it, but I think you just do the best that you can, take what you've learned from the past, and and go with your training.
Now, upon reflecting on some of the experiences of the responses during that time, are there any new policies that METS has put into place as a direct result of that experience or tornado?
Yeah, so I probably overdo this a little bit, but I would rather be safe than sorry. So anytime we get now severe weather potential for the day, we kind of look at that as what that potential is. We've got a great working relationship with the local fire departments, and so we all have got an app on our phone that we can communicate through now. We get alerts and messages through, and so we try to stay ahead of it. And as we see what the potential is, then we put extra ambulances on duty. We'll call in people off duty. We'll staff up trucks. And so the day of the tornado, we thought there was a potential, and we put one extra ambulance on for the day. And so back then, I think we ran a normal shift of 6 ambulances. So I think we ended up with 7 that were on duty that day. Now we run 10 on a normal schedule. So we'll add a couple to that if we think severe weather's coming up. But we've got a MCI trailer that's loaded with a lot of mass casualty equipment we did not have prior to the tornado. We do now. We've got a 4-wheel drive Gator ATV that we did not have prior to the tornado that we have now. So I think our equipment has improved. I think just the general awareness around what storms can be like and what they can do has improved, because we staff up, and we'll just go ahead and we'll have crews in ahead of time, prior to waiting till after the fact. And so as far as policies locally, that's what's changed. As far as across the state, we roster what's called a strike team across the state when there's going to be big weather in the state of Missouri. So the state's divided into regions that follows like what the Missouri Highway Patrol is. So we're Region D down in southwest Missouri. So Joplin, Springfield are the couple of the bigger cities in that region. So when the state, you know, a week or so ago, a couple of weeks ago, when there was severe weather forecast all across the state, every region had a strike team, which is 5 ambulances already on a roster. So basically what that does for us, those ambulances in those areas are already ready to go. So if Kansas City were to get hit and need help, we already have 5 ambulances in our region, 5 ambulances in a neighboring region. So they made the call, and we've got an influx of ambulances headed that way. So that has changed on a statewide level that we did not have. And again, all of that came because of Joplin.
Interesting.
So
I don't doubt that every time anything like that happens, there's always kind of a reassessment of policies and things like that. So it's cool to see that even out of an imaginal event, like that some positive changes are even able to come out of that.
Yeah, and we've got capabilities now too on the radio communication side of it to be able to talk to all of our neighboring agencies. So we didn't back then. Now the state has got, it's called MOSWIN. It's a statewide radio system that virtually everybody participates on in the state or has those capabilities. So we can get assigned a couple of those frequencies and be able to, you know, have communications with everybody across the state. And then agencies that are Kansas or Oklahoma, since we're right here on the line, that come in to help, we can actually take one of their frequencies and patch it to one of ours. So they may be on their channel, we may be on our channel, but a link can happen at our dispatch center to combine those 2 channels together. So radio communications and planning has definitely improved dramatically since Joplin.
Oh yeah. Now, reflecting back 15 years from the event, can you give me an image or memory that has stuck with you since that time?
There's a couple from the scene that I wouldn't elaborate on just because of involving specific patients, and I don't know why those images kind of stick. But probably overall, I think was pulling up to that 24th and Main area and seeing St. John's with smoke coming out of it. I worked at St. John's, started in '95, worked in the surgery center there, and then became a dispatcher for MedFlight when they had the helicopter base there. And so I'd worked in that building. We had taken numerous I'd been in that building, you know, a bunch. And so to see it smoking and inoperable, I feel like was probably a big thing for whatever reason that sticks in my mind. The feeling of being helpless and overwhelmed, still kind of today, looking back at it, probably still sticks in my mind a little bit. But then I think the big thing that probably overshadows that is, you know, the amount of support. There was over 100 different ambulance services that came to our region across 7 different states. So just the EMS support that we had from all these different places, and how I think it made us stronger. It made us closer as a family. It had a lot of positive impacts, you know, despite the negative, you know, with it. But a lot of positive and a lot of good came from it. So I think those are probably a few of the main things that really stick out in my mind.
Incredible. Thank you. Lastly, I'd like to know from the perspective of an emergency response team, how can the community be better both prepared but also respond to a situation like that? Like, how can the community be more supportive to the emergency response teams and be better prepared themselves?
Well, I think definitely taking these storms seriously. You know, we're in the Midwest, and so I think a lot of people, including myself, you get severe weather, well, what people want to go out and watch. You know, people want to go out and maybe not be taking shelter and stuff like that. Fortunately, those type of tornadoes don't happen. You know, they're few and far between, and we hope we don't experience another one of those. But taking the warning serious and taking shelter, not being out on the roadways, trying to have an advanced plan of, if we've got outdoor activities planned, where are we going to go if something happens, if we've got severe weather forecasts for the day. So I think having a plan like that, if people know where their storm shelters are, know that they're available, and go as early on as those shelters open, I think is great. I think a lot of the deaths that we had, were people that didn't either have basements or people that were out on the roads. We learned kind of firsthand too, the big box buildings, some of these bigger buildings that have the big wide open areas are not the type of building you want to be in, because when one wall goes, the roof comes down. So just making sure that you're weather aware, you have a plan, and that you're taking it serious. As far as helping us out after the storm, I think the whole self-deployment or doing your own thing, even though it may feel right at the time, it kind of hinders things a little bit because you don't know what resources you have. So what I would really like to see is, and I think the city's got a better plan now in place, for a meeting location for volunteers right off the bat, and somebody that can coordinate that, so that if people are willing to help and have certain resources available, then they have a spot that they can go, so they can be accounted for and sent to the right areas at the right time, versus kind of showing up and doing their own thing. So I get not every scenario is going to prepare for that. If it's your neighbor's house, or you're obviously not going to be able to drive through the damage area to go check in somewhere, you're not going to stop all of that from happening. But if you're from outside the region and you're coming to help, having that volunteer check-in station where resources can go and check in and be accounted for, I think is huge. And I think that would help add to the plan of action a little bit more than just going and doing it on your own.
Fantastic. Thank you for just your time and sharing your insights, your experiences. I appreciate just all what you and your team do to take care of our community, that we wouldn't be able to come back from things like that nearly as easily without support of emergency services. So,
well, thank you very much. We appreciate the opportunity.
Thank you. Today we are with Dr. Chad Boulware. Thank you so much, Chad, for joining us today. Would you mind just sharing a little bit of your history, both with Missouri Southern, but also as you moved into professional medicine?
Sure. Yeah. So I graduated 1995 from Webb City, and after you're looking around different colleges, universities, I ended up coming to Missouri Southern, interviewing for the honors program, and got into the honors program, which at the time was full tuition, so that was pretty hard to turn down. And came into the honors program here at Southern with a biology and pre-med emphasis. And at the time, Bonnie Prentice was here. He was the pre-med advisor, and he sold us on the fact that the Southern had an 80% placement rate to med school and a 100% placement rate through the honors program. So I was like, well, full tuition and 100%, that's pretty hard to turn down. Looking at other places that were still going to be thousands of dollars, and also moving away from my girlfriend, who was my future wife, made it hard to turn down coming to Southern. And really just felt really comfortable at Southern. Came into school right after high school and went through the curriculum, graduated in '99, and got into med school at it was UHS, University of Health Sciences at the time. It's now the school KCU, which is here in Joplin and out of Kansas City. But then went through their program for Doctor of Osteopathy degree. And since then I came back to Freeman for residency in emergency medicine, and finished that program and stayed here in town and worked at Freeman. Really been here ever since, so came back into Joplin in the early 2000s, and then have been here working in emergency medicine since then.
And since the topic of our discussion a little bit is your experience in emergency medicine, and specifically in the context of the Joplin tornado, but tell me, before May 22nd, what was the average experience, or what does a day look like, if there's an average day necessarily in the ER?
Yeah, so emergency medicine, one of the things that really excited me about it, I was pre-med, I worked at St. John's as a tech, and just the constant variety, variety of the patient care, the variety of the people you work with, the variety of the shifts, everything really felt pretty natural to me, and felt like I was well suited for that. And then going through residency, going through clinical rotations, it really still felt like emergency medicine was what I wanted to do. And again, just the variety of patients, being able to take care of anybody and everybody that came through the door, and having all the different complaints, chest pain, belly pain, stroke complaints or trauma, going from just simple ankle sprain, that kind of thing, to femur fracture, shoulder reductions, and everything's hands-on, and it's just no telling what you might see in a given shift. So it's just that constant variety is really what I enjoy about emergency medicine. That never gets boring. It's always something new and something different to look forward to.
Absolutely. So now moving on to May 22nd, I know you weren't in the hospital or the ER at the moment that the tornado came through, but can you tell me, at what point did you decide, I need to go in? What was that conversation with your family, or how did you decide to go in? Like, when did you?
Yeah, so that's really interesting. I had worked the night before, and we were supposed to have a birthday party for my grandmother that day, and I'd probably woke up about 3 p.m. and we were getting ready to go, getting the kids ready to go, and for some reason, I don't know why, I just had like a bad feeling, or you can call it a premonition or whatever. It got close to 5, and we were supposed to leave and go to this birthday party, and I just started yelling at my wife and kids, and yelling at the dog, and it was pretty out of character, my wife would say, and she's like, "What's going on?" It's always like, everybody get down, get in the basement, get in the crawl space. And then we heard the sirens go off, and it was really a pretty day. When you look back, it wasn't like your typical thunderstorm with the overcast skies. It was really a weird day. So after the sirens went off, and we kind of lost power, we lost TV, everything was kind of knocked out, and there wasn't really a lot of communication. So I think it was kind of on FM radio. We were listening to the reports, and I just looked at my wife, and I was off duty since work the night before, but we just kind of gave each other that look, like, well, we probably ought to go check it out and see what's going on. And I packed a bag, and I didn't know when I'd be back. We didn't know how bad it was, but it was just kind of we better go help. So I got in the truck and went towards the hospital. I didn't get very far. The roads were packed. It was bumper to bumper. And as I made my way into town, we lived in Webb City at the time, and I went kind of on the west side of town, I think down Maiden Lane, and it was just bumper to bumper with pickup trucks, and people were in the back of the pickup trucks, just kind of makeshift ambulances, basically on the way to the hospital. But we couldn't get anywhere. It was packed, heading south on Maiden Lane. So listening to the radio, I heard that Mercy, or I don't remember if it was St. John's yet or Mercy yet, but they had set up a kind of a triage scenario at Memorial Hall. And so I was already like at 20th and Maiden Lane, but we weren't moving. So I turned around and went to Memorial Hall. And when we got there, it was like a mass unit on what you'd see on TV from military, disaster zones. It was just people everywhere, and we were just running around taking care of everyone. A lot of people had just, there was a lot of wound care. There was a lot of, people with cuts and broken bones and that type of thing. And just, there was a lot of us running around. There were limited supplies, and you kind of were laughing at the time because we were having to reuse stuff that we normally throw away, you know, and we were just dipping it in the betadine, which is the, you know, germ killing solution. We were just reusing things that normally we would just be thrown out because we didn't have that much supply there at that temporary, you know, hospital that was just kind of makeshift. And as we were working there, there were a couple of us from Freeman that, you know, we were getting killed there at Memorial Hall, and we just thought, man, they're probably getting killed at Freeman, and we felt like we needed to get down to Freeman and help out. And you know, we ended up finding a police officer, and we had a police escort down Main Street, and it took us an hour to get from Memorial Hall to Freeman. And it was just rubble. It was just power lines down, trees down, rubble. It was insane. Like, it was just like, it was something from the movies, you know. It was just, it was a war zone. And by the time we got to Freeman, I can't remember what time of day it was. We checked in, and again, it was just people everywhere. You know, we have 40 beds in our ER, and each room is kind of a bay set up, and most of the time, you know, there's one person per room. And when we got there were probably 4 at least in each room, and then the halls were overflowing. We had beds in the hallway. Every spot that you can imagine was full with a patient, you know, and it was just, like I said, a lot of wound care, a lot of extremity injuries, a lot of, you know, there was a lot of penetrating trauma that went to the OR, and then that was quickly overwhelmed, and then it was just kind of a constant triage of like who's able to go home and who do we need to send out, and that process just kept going all night. It was a pretty surreal process, but that was pretty, you know, the whole, if you're able to walk and get downstairs, they had a setup downstairs where, you know, people that were not as badly injured went down, and the people that were more severely injured were in the main ER, and there were all these cots set up in our conference rooms downstairs that we used for kind of the less severe patients. And then, I mean, we probably went through hundreds of patients down there, and I had a lot of volunteer docs from the area that came in, and somehow or another I got charged with supervising them, which was pretty funny because one of my docs that wrote me a letter to med school and was kind of one of my mentors in residency showed up, and he checked in, and he was told he'd be reporting to me, and that was like, oh, this is a full circle moment. But it was just crazy. It was a crazy experience.
So when you mentioned earlier that when you have an ER situation, like you never know what's going to coming through the doors. In this context, with specifically a tornado-related incident, you mentioned there were a lot of like puncture wounds or other things like that. What were things that you may have never even engaged with before that point that were things you had to deal with?
Well, there were, you know, there's probably just the volume of sick patients. So, you know, I remember hearing stories where, you know, someone came in and they were basically disemboweled. They were holding their stomach, they were holding their guts in their hand, and they walked in, and you know, those people went straight to the operating room. And then there were people with, you know, they had fence posts in their leg. You know, there were all kinds of mangled extremities and just bad wounds. And then, and you just did the best to wash them out and clean them up. And again, we were running out of medications, we were running out of supplies. So there was a lot of things that we did that you can't imagine doing in a normal setting, in a normal hospital. And we were, you know, just using resources as best we knew how. And there were probably, I mean, pretty much everybody in our group in the ER came in to help. And then, like I said, there were maybe 20 other, you know, trauma surgeons and other physicians that showed up from out of town that were helping. And we were all just running around, taking care of patients as best we could. But, you know, pretty much anything like you would see on the movies in a disaster. I mean, it was worse than that. Like, it was insane, just the amount of trauma. And interestingly, we didn't have a lot of, people that came in with random, belly pain or a cough, that night. It was pretty much all serious, trauma victims, and we didn't have a lot of the less serious complaints that night. But
You were mentioning not only do you have limited resources as far as tools at your disposal, but also staffing, just because of the massive volume of patients. How do you even prioritize or go about deciding, like, where do I put different people in a position like that?
yeah, so we had some disaster protocols, and you don't ever plan on using those. And at the time, I don't remember them being particularly good. So we had to retool them after the tornado. But again, we're just going back to people with, more stable versus unstable, vital signs or complaints, or, if they had obviously an open wound or things of that nature, they would get prioritized. But we had patients, I remember, waiting in the waiting room that we would just run out and check on, and if they had stable vitals, they kept waiting. One of my colleagues asked me to go check on a friend of hers, and she was out front, and they thought they might have a collapsed lung, and I go out there and I assess them. I listen to their lung, I hear breath sounds, I don't feel any, signs like clinically of a collapsed lung, like you could tell from a patient that has a collapsed lung. There's certain things you look for, and so they just waited, until they could get back. But we just constantly were going back and forth, checking on people. If they, we might have something here, we'd go check them, and then if they felt like that was what was going on, we brought them back. And again, later on, a lot of the people that were kind of the walking wounded ended up going downstairs to that conference room setup, which was more of a ambulatory medicine, like an urgent care type setting, and got triaged and got seen. But as the night was going on, like, I didn't realize this until later in the shift or later in the evening. Anybody who was sick, seriously, like, we were quickly overwhelmed. We were like the operating room and the admissions, like, everything was full. And so there was just basically a Congo line of ambulances that came from all over the 4 states. And it went all the way down 32nd Street, coming and going. And there was a command center set up, and somebody didn't even work at Freeman. Like, I don't know where this person came from, if it was like a national, response team or what, but they had set up a command center, and basically anybody that needed, surgery or to be admitted, they were coordinating transfer to Springfield, Kansas City, Fayetteville, Tulsa, and these people were just getting shipped out basically as quickly as they were coming in, because everything was overwhelmed there at Freeman. I found that out on my last patient that was sick downstairs. He had a vertebral fracture in his lumbar spine and his lower back, and I was talking to my neurosurgeon, like, hey, we need to admit him, he's got a lumbar spine fracture. I was like, what are you doing admitting him? We're just transferring everybody. I'm like, we're transferring everybody? Like, okay, this is news to me. And that was my last. Once he was wrapped up, I kind of, everything had died down, and that was pretty much the end of the shift. But it was a crazy process to see come just out of that disaster. Like, everybody's response from the region was incredible.
You mentioned, so at the close of your time, kind of in the midst of all that, how many hours do you think you were there?
Well, I didn't know what was going to happen, and like I said, I packed a bag, and I told my wife, like, the phones were down, everything was kind of out, and it was a weird experience because I was expecting to be there for days, and really, I probably got to the ER around 7 or 8 after trying to make it, from Memorial Hall, and it was probably later than that even, but just working through the night. I remember it was like 8 a.m. on Monday morning, and it kind of just dropped off. It was bizarre, and I don't know if that was from like all the transfers and getting everybody out of the department, but it was eerily calm. It just died off. It was 8 a.m. in the morning, and I remember looking around like, nothing's going on. And like I said before, like the people that normally come to the ER for a work note, they weren't coming. You know, like it was not, if you weren't sick, you didn't go in. And so it was dead. Like there was nothing going on. And we were just looking around like, is this for real? Like, are we able to go home? Because we were expecting to be there for days, you know, like those of us that came in and volunteered. And then the regular guys that were staffed, you know, they were like, yeah, go home. We're good. We got it. So it was a bizarre, you know, it was over as dramatically as it started.
Interesting.
So
now that you had some time to reflect on that, maybe even right after that period of just intense work with patients coming in, is there now 15 years later still a moment in the midst of all that is like burned into your memory from that experience?
I just remember like everybody's just urgency and just the, you know, it is something like on the movies where you're seeing these people and they're super sick and everybody's running around like crazy. You know, we had one of my colleagues was literally going room to room, intubating people, and that's you know, when you put them on a ventilator and you breathe for them, you sedate them, and he was just dramatic. He had this wild look in his eye, and he was just going back and forth to different rooms to get people, you know, to secure the airway and to get them stabilized. And it was just the look in his eye, you know, he just had this intense, you know, he was running out of medicine, and he was like, this is the last vial, you know, kind of situation. And just the urgency of everybody, you know, I don't really have like a one patient scenario, but just everybody's overall like drive and urgency to take care of people. That's what was impressive. Like we were just all helping each other, you know, trying to get through the volume of patients that were coming in. So that was probably the most memorable thing.
It makes me think of just how like coordinated or like of a team process this is. And I feel like anytime I've gone through any kind of medical process at a hospital, like everybody has their position they seem to play, and they know like where their role is and how to move me through that process or move an individual through that process. And it's always so engaging to see how many people work as a team to make that happen. How did you see that play out, even in the midst of some maybe a more chaotic context?
Yeah, there were several layers to it, right? So like, you know, patients came in, they were triaged, and if they were stable or not stable, they went back into the department or downstairs. And like I said earlier, there were 3 or 4 patients to every room, basically, in line in the hallways with gurneys. And as we worked, we were kind of going around the hallways. I just remember, you know, writing orders on a sheet, and I think we'd already transitioned to some electronic medical records, so it was crazy to even be using paper still, you know. So we were writing orders down and just leaving them on the cot. They had charts on the cots for the patients on the gurneys, and the nurses would come back after you, and they would see your orders, and they'd do your orders that way, because everything was just overwhelmed. Like there was no computer, you know, tracking of everybody. It was just it was all like disaster charts, and so everything was pretty organized that way. But you just trusted your staff to, you know, come around again and do the orders that you'd put down on the disaster charts. And it was crazy to see that process play out. And it's, you know, it's kind of frustrating now because you do stuff on the computer and it takes, you know, 30 minutes for the nurses to get a medicine or something. And it's just the way the process works with the computer order entry and the pharmacy verifying everything. And so that night it was just good old paper, and people were just doing everything you had on paper and just going from one patient to the next. And it was just there was like, you know, the physicians would come through, then the nurses would come through, and then the techs would come through, and then we'd start over. And it was just the process of, you know, going through all the patients to get them stabilized.
Did you have a lot of volunteers or anybody kind of outside the direct medical community that came in that you had to help like navigate some of that? Yeah,
you know, we had so many people just come in, and first of all, the community, like I said earlier, they were lining the streets with pickup trucks, and patients they were taking the doors off, the houses, and a lot of the houses were already destroyed. They were grabbing the front door, and they'd have a patient on a door, and they'd load them up in the back of the pickup trucks, and they would bring them in. We had several patients that came in on doors that way from just, Good Samaritans running out there. The ambulance crews were certainly overwhelmed, and just the community response was incredible. And then in the hospital, again, we had pretty much anybody who wasn't on duty came in addition to the people who were already there. And then we had so many people from outlying facilities that came in and helped. And that was, again, from like Tulsa, Springfield, Kansas City, Northwest Arkansas, even like Wichita. There were several other physicians and surgeons that just showed up to volunteer. It was incredible to see everybody just, come in for the common good, just to help out.
Is there one memory that makes you just think, oh, there's good in humanity as a result of that experience, or any memory there?
Certainly, I think, just everybody's willingness to help, not knowing when we'd be done, not knowing when, the last patient would come in, just coming in to help get through the disaster. Everything was just a mess, and nobody had any idea of when things would be back to normal. And then people just still, sacrifice their time and efforts just to come in and help. So that was really the biggest thing, was just the willingness to help the community, from the medical staff and nursing staff, everyone there, really the whole region, not just Freeman, but, the other guys that came and helped and volunteered. But I certainly don't know if, it's a good lesson for other communities, like, what that came to help us, like if there was another disaster, just to be ready to go and help out in other communities in the region. But yeah, the response by the surrounding communities was incredible.
So looking at more just technical standards that hospitals may consider implementing as a result, or may have implemented as a result of the tornado, were there any things that came out of this experience that either at Freeman or even on a national level, hospitals have changed some policies or have responded to as a result of that?
I certainly think the overall disaster, we started implementing a disaster drill, just to be ready for something like that. Like the scale of the Joplin tornado was probably once in a lifetime experience, but we certainly found out that we were pretty ill prepared to start with. And then after the tornado, there were a lot of drills for disaster response that we went through at Freeman, and I think through the region, I think people use that day as a reminder and as a reason to practice disaster response drills. And specifically, I'm not sure of any protocols, but I know that what we had at the time was pretty limited. And then going forward from the tornado, we certainly have made that process a lot more efficient. So there was a lot of good that came out of it as far as our response to disasters and protocols. So, certainly, and even like the way the ambulance service, the EMS service, I'm sure their protocols have changed since then, but the way that they came in and helped get patients out to different facilities in the region, it was incredible.
It's cool just to see out of a catastrophic event how still we can pull good, valuable things from that, and still reflect on a challenging time, but good things that came out of that. So going into that personally, when you reflect on what happened 15 years ago in your own life, how does that affect what you do professionally, but also just personally? How has like that time kind of affected you?
Really, it's kind of the essence of why I got into emergency medicine, right? Like it's just the nature of it, and being hands-on and being just integral to people, saving lives. That a lot of us go into emergency medicine for that 10% or so that is really the exciting stuff you see on TV, and you don't get that all the time. You get mostly 90% of belly pain and upper respiratory symptoms and that kind of thing. But just getting to make a big impact directly for people that were sick and injured, from the tornado, that was certainly something that I'll never forget, and it really kind of validated my whole reason to do emergency medicine. And for people thinking about getting into emergency medicine, it needs to be someone who's very hands-on and very willing to do the extra, and not just sit back and take care of patients on a scheduled basis, but be willing to flex out of their comfort zone a little bit and help out when everything hits the fan.
So you mentioned like if students are interested in going into the medical field, especially like emergency.
Yeah.
Is there like one thing either from your personal experience or professionally that you feel like if I had one lesson, I know you kind of went into that a little bit, but if you had one lesson for them to take away or to carry through their career, what would you tell them?
Well, first and foremost, just take care of people, right? Like you go into medicine to take care of people. You're not going into medicine for your own benefit. Like, be real, be yourself, but like, don't be afraid to touch patients. Like so many times we get people through the ER that rotate and everybody's gloving up and getting all gowned up and everything. And it's just like, go touch a patient on their shoulder and be empathetic and caring. And that's like that night, everything was hands-on, literally. Like we were having to, we didn't have x-ray. We were going head to toe down patients' extremities, feeling their arms, feeling their legs, touching them to see what was injured and to see what was hurt. And, for people going into medicine, like we need to get back to, touching people and caring for people and just being authentic and real, and not trying to sit back and analyze or overthink it too much. It needs to be more of a direct patient contact and just just being real with people, just being yourself and taking care of people.
Great lesson. Do you have anything else that from your experience or just from memories that you'd like to share with our audience today?
I'm just glad, like that experience was pretty dramatic, and just to say that I was a part of it, it's pretty rewarding just to know that, people in our group that sacrificed and, did all the extra work, and not just on the night of the tornado, but, from that point forward for about 5 to 6 years, it was just a chaotic time. We were pretty busy. Mercy was pretty shut down, pretty damaged, from the whole thing, and their temporary hospital was kind of limited in some of its capabilities. So Freeman got to do a lot of extra work, and that kind of gets swept under the rug. Just the volume that we had for the 5 to 6 years that followed that, and it was a hard time, and just to go through all that with the people that we work with. It was pretty rewarding. Just glad to be of service to the community. And looking back, I don't think it's certainly a terrible day, but also one that there's a lot of good that came from it, and a lot of good memories and just the whole community coming together and serving each other. Something I'll never forget.
Dr. Boulware, thank you so much for your time and insights, and what an incredible story.